The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Learning How to Learn by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Background to humility. Before the period generally regarded as historical time, there has been an operation of a form of cognition linked with human development which is outside the current methods of acquiring and utilizing information. The result of this effort has often been called wisdom, although the word wisdom has often been applied to other fields. Relics are not the thing itself. Many religious, mystical, and other formulations are, up to a point, shrines for the relics of a completely or partially successful attempt to present and make available to various individuals and communities means for acquiring this knowledge. Like almost everything on Earth, they are subject to deterioration or fossilization. They become both museums and exhibits at one and the same time. Because of the tendency to stress discipline and group attention without contemporaneous adjustments of other factors, many such formulations, some of them called schools or cults, have crystallized in the short or long term, and not infrequently they have claimed a monopoly of truth or effective ritual. This process, mirroring limited thinking patterns, frequently goes so far as to lead to a virtual destruction of the dynamic of the formulation of the school. In practice, exclusivism and dogmatism, beyond a certain point, militate against certain necessities of flexibility. There is a continuing need for regeneration. What appears to some people as the sum total of human heritage of philosophy, metaphysics, or even magical thinking can also be viewed, for the foregoing reasons, as heavily burdened with the wreckage or misinterpretation, through selective choice, of formulations previously operated by coherent schools. The factor causing this state of affairs is endemic in the human community, and has often been unsuspected by large sections of whole civilizations, though made the subject of close attention and rectification by specialists outside of mechanical and confined thought. Such specialists are those who can grasp internal principles and dynamics, not those who merely rearrange. The tradition maintained by competence. In contradistinction to the public and overt formulations familiar to all as stabilizations of many forms of religious, psychological, and community action philosophies and other systems, there has always been a continuous, altruistic stream of guardianship of this comprehensive and adaptational knowledge throughout history. This is based on capacity and knowledge, not on arbitrarily deciding to become a specialist. There are excellently sufficient reasons why the foregoing facts have never been more publicly known or accepted in any real depth. Among those, more easily understandable by customary thinkers, is the fact that to make an announcement such as this to those who are basically selfish will serve mainly to increase their selfishness at the expense of their real, inner desire for truth, thus further masking the potentialities of the teaching from such people. Another easily understood reason is that the existence of narrow systems of thought, oversimplified to contain the aspirations without regard to potential, and to permit a wide-scale disciplining of populations, has produced a type of expert or concentrator of this kind of bias who will automatically feel insecure if any attempt is made to widen his horizons. The result will be opposition, distrust, and confusion. From time to time, certain cosmological and human factors being in alignment, there is both a need for and a possibility to re-establish, by means of a special and skilled effort, formulations and activities which maximize the prospects of more rapid and thorough penetration of the teaching, which leads to the development referred to as knowing oneself or having wisdom. Several such periods, cyclic in character, have occurred in recent times. None of them has been generally recognized for what it is. This, again, is not to say that because one believes this, one is automatically able to find it. The correct approach is everything. Role of an intervention. The first stage of this knowledge concerns answers to the questions generally phrased as involving the origin, nature, being, and future of mankind itself, collectively as well as in the individual. The manner and order of procedure of approaching these questions themselves involves a capacity whose absence or ineffectiveness in the ordinary individual spells his incapacity to participate in his own development. He is in need of an organizing intervention to break the vicious circle which results. Knowledge of the end creates the means. The desire for an awakening, often used as a technical term, may or may not be accompanied by the information and experience essential to precede this stage. The teaching, for its part, is carried out and is able to cross ideological boundaries because of a knowledge of the objective, an objective which is at worst postulated as an assumption that it exists, at best glimpsed, and thenceforward is the subject of repeated attempts to devise a means to recover this glimpse. The working hypothesis or traditional framework provides the structure by which the would-be illuminate attempts to approach this goal. In the case of the school, knowledge alone provides the basis upon which the structure can be devised. Once you know the end, you can devise the means. The end does not justify the means. It provides it. The means, employed in this sense, is the structure referred to in some literature as the work. The school. One of the structures within which this knowledge is studied, collected, conserved, and transmitted has often been termed a school. There are others, continuously at work, whose existence and mode of operation is not of applied value, though frequently a matter of curiosity and inquisitiveness, occupying much time and giving rise to much effort, due to the faultily based assumption that a lively interest in something once heard about may lead to familiarity with it, and hence usefulness to be gained from it. Since, however, its modus operandi is far from having an exactly operable analogy in current thought, it is, in fact, if not a theory, completely concealed. It is extremely common for encounters to take place between people who are interested in this area and those working in it, without the former being in any way able to enter into it, or most frequently for them to have any conception or recognition of the role or method of operation of the other individuals. The schoolwork is a lower-level activity which nonetheless has to be passed through before a recognition of the higher level is possible. Acceptance of this principle is among the first requirements leading to the necessary effective timescale and order of events in which the teaching may take effect. One of the chief barriers to accepting this fact, even as a working hypothesis, is the overvaluation of the role, potentiality, and knowledge of the learner. It is for this reason that such stress is placed, in so many traditional systems of which viable fragments subsist, upon the need for what is approximately rendered in familiar parlance as humility. Its distortion is self-abasement. What humility is not for. As one of the great Sufis said, "My humility is not there to impress you, it is there for its own reason." The person that you feel yourself to be, according to the Sufis, is a false person, which has no true reality. When humility is exercised, people begin to realize that they do not, as it were, exist at all. This perception of oneself as Adam, not being, is stressed in Hujwiri's Revelation, in the second chapter dealing with the real meaning of poverty. When people take pride in their humility, They have merely adopted another concocted self as part of their not being, and this is what produces hypocrites. The purpose of seeing through one's own nothingness is to see beyond into what is really there to which one's real self can relate. Humility is therefore directly concerned with the quest for absolute truth. No value in making a virtue of a function. The coincidence of some similarity between the words Adam, not being, and Adam, man, has caused poets and others in Eastern languages to equate the two neatly in verse and prose. It is interesting to note, by the way, that even Orientalists and reviewers, discussing this point, sometimes observe so little of this play on words that they even charge Sufi writers with being ignorant or adopting strange usages when they say such things as, man is Adam. I often feel that this uncharacteristic failure to register the contention is in such cases due to the fact that the subjectivity of the commentator is censoring his understanding. He is, after all, generally a man. As a man, he does not want to think of himself as not being. This is all the more marked in people, who do of course include scholars, who actually identify themselves by means of the learnt patterns and information stock which is, to the Sufi, part of the non-being, the personality and not the essence of humankind. In other words, as we all know, pride prevents humility. Pride is attached to a sense of oneself which may be wholly or partially created by secondary things, like believing that one is learned. It has truly been said that humility is not so much a virtue as a necessity in order to learn. Rabia and the door. The posture which is required in the Sufi was well illustrated by Rabia al-Adawiyya. She heard that Salih of Qazwin was teaching by the phrase, "Knock at the door and it will be opened to you." Rabia said, "How long will you persist in saying this, O Salih, when the door has never been shut?" The lack of humility is also something of a conspiracy, where people not only ignore it when it is found in others, but cannot credit its reality. This is in addition to those who cannot even conceive how or when to exercise it. Tale of the Professor. Not long ago, pursuing the first remark, I was showing a visitor around the grounds of this house. As we passed a quiet and diligent man sitting on the ground mending a piece of wood, the visitor asked, "Who is that?" I said, "That is Professor So-and-so." His brow creased into a frown, and he looked at him again. Then he looked at me. Now he said, "Are you sure?" And, pursuing the second remark, there is the incident involving Maruf of Kark. Collecting date stones. Sari al-Sakiti saw Maruf picking up the stones of dates from the ground and asked him what he was doing. A child was crying, he said, because, being a penniless orphan, he had no nuts like other children. So I am going to collect date stones and sell them to be ground into flour, so that he can have some nuts and be happy. How serious is the student? Question. I have heard you say that many of the people who imagine that they are serious about the study of Sufism are in fact not serious at all, and because of that cannot benefit from it. Can I have an example? Answer. One of the best examples is a matter of our daily experience. People read books or hear things about Sufism and immediately proceed to beat a path to our door. Now at this juncture I have published 16 books on Sufi ideas and action. One would infer surely that if I am publishing this material, and in such quantities and with such energy, we regard its publication, and hence its study, as important. But out of the average of 10,000 or so letters received each year, A significant proportion of all people are found to be serious, as they claim, without bothering to read the material. If they were serious, they would give it serious attention. If, as they so often state, they don't want written materials, why do they apply to me, since I am dealing partly in written materials? People come to see me not having a sound grasp of what we are saying, because they have not studied our literature, and so I cannot help them. They come from all over the world, spending money and wasting time, but they won't spend money on books, won't give time to their study. Do you imagine that one can regard such people as serious? Admittedly, they constitute only a minority of all our contacts, but the large total number of people contacting me means that this minority still adds up to a sizable total number of individuals. If you want to assess someone, look at what he does, and ignore his protestations of being serious, at least for the moment. If he is acting seriously, you will be more inclined to accept his claim to be serious. If he is only saying it, no matter how strongly he may believe it, we can only conclude that he has little or no idea of what he is really doing, and hence I would be the last person to be able to be of use to him, especially since he is first in need of elementary instruction in straight thinking. Knowledge as perception. In these days, as in the past, what is generally called knowledge is a great veil to understanding. Ghazur-i-Ilahi reminds his hearers that there is scholastic and observational learning. Inner knowledge, perception, is the real form of knowledge. The one is like knowing about honey by studying it, the other to know it by taste. One is knowing, the other is only knowing about knowing. What seems to be a lack of seriousness is really better referred to by your second definition, that people cannot benefit. The reason why is that they lack a desire to pay attention to what is said and done. Cheese and the moon. When we talk about the seriousness of the student, we have to remember that many people have very little idea what serious study might mean. It often means for them compulsive study, whether there is any product or not. You may have noticed that the British Association for the Advancement of Science, of which I admit to being a life member, by the way, held a meeting at which the discoveries announced included that moon rock shares properties with cheddar and Emmentaler cheese, that in general fat people do not go to universities, that rats prefer listening to Mozart rather than Schoenberg. This wasn't in the Middle Ages, with angels dancing on pins, but in 1970 of the Christian era. Social and psychological elements in Sufi study. Question: are you reducing metaphysical and spiritual studies to the level of sociology and psychology? Answer: no. I am, on the contrary, trying to show the contaminants and confusions from socializing and popular psychology in these studies. If people think that they are worshipping God when they are in reality seeking emotional excitement, this can hardly be to everyone's advantage. If the sensations aroused by transfer of emotions from one person or one system to another are thought to be special, when they are extensively described and illustrated as normal social actions and developments, what harm is there in affirming the truth? Question: it is often said that it is better to leave people with their beliefs rather than to disturb them. Answer: if the belief is equivalent to believing that an appendix pain is the work of the devil, it is wrong to leave the patient with it, for he is likely to die. The man who fell off a mountain. It may not be our role to do anything for him, but on the lower level we can't be prevented from alluding to his state. People like this sometimes resemble the man who fell off a mountain. When he had reached halfway down, he said to himself, 5,000 feet and nothing has happened yet. In fact, it is quite pleasurable. We may have to leave such a man alone, but we can't help noting his real situation. Such people are often those who turn up and say, I am following the X path, and I find it rewarding, but I would like to add a little of your wisdom. What religion is. The belief that something which is really, for instance, a selfish self-absorption in religious activity is anti-religion in effect. Sheikh Ibrahim Ghazur Ilahi truly says, "That which takes you to God is religion. Whatever stands between you and God is the world." How many pious people realize that? The levels of sociology and psychology which your question regards as a reduction are, in fact, essential to examine at the learning how to learn stage, because unless the psychology is correctly oriented, there is no spirituality, though there can be obsession and emotionality, often mistaken for it. Those who trade in such things, mistaking them for spirituality, have of course, knowingly or otherwise, a vested interest in discouraging interest in the psychological and sociological levels. Those interested in truth, however, cannot afford such luxuries. As for the social level, this and the psychological are dealt with by this quotation from one of the greatest of all Sufis, who is not dealing in spirituality, if you define this term narrowly. Sheikh Abdullah Ansari says, "What is worship? To realize reality. What is the sacred law? To do no evil. What is reality? Selflessness." This is the Sufi approach, not the other way about. There can be no spirituality, according to the Sufi masters, without psychology, psychological insight, and sociological balance. So if you are looking for spirituality which requires such insights, you have to look at the reduction by the great classical Sufi masters, not by me, for I am no innovator in this respect. If, too, you imagine that the Sufis are not to be regarded as spiritual because of their insistence on psychology and sociology, you are out of luck again. Not only Islamic authorities but scholars from all faiths continue to regard the Sufis as among the greatest exponents of the spiritual among humankind. There is no wisdom where there is no common sense. It cannot, under those conditions, find any expression. They say, "Seek wisdom while you have the strength, or you may lose the strength without gaining wisdom." The Invisible Cat. But you must start where it counts. You cannot start halfway along and expect results. Mark Twain advertised as a hoax that he had lost a cat so black that it could not be seen by ordinary light, and wanted it back. Nearly 1,000 people contacted him, claiming to have seen him. Would you begin to teach such people, or at least people in such a state of mind, anything? The Robber Priest. In England, no time ago, there was a priest who was a burglar, who even burgled another vicarage, an abbey, and a school. He was caught trying to rob a bank, which he travelled to by taxi, having enlisted his housekeeper, convincing her that they were doing something good. Should the social and psychological levels of such a person not be looked at before proceeding with the spiritual, the higher levels? Another priest got divorced and married a witch. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.